Good evening. My name is Annie Frederick, and on behalf of the Hawaii Alliance for Progressive Action, I would like to thank all of you who are tuning in for tonight's film screening of This Is the Way We Rise and Talk Story. HAPA will be continuing to host a series of films and related conversations that explore a variety of issues impacting Hawaii's land and people, as well as the homegrown movements and activism seeking to address historic injustices and chart a more equitable future. Audre Lorde said that poetry is not only a dream and vision, it is the skeleton architecture of our lives. It lays the foundations for a future of change, a bridge across our fears of what has never been before. I'd like to express gratitude to our incredible panelists for all the ways that their work inspires us to think deeply about the world around us and to take action. Thank you for taking the time to share your work and delve into this discussion on the role of arts and activism. You're so fortunate to be joined by three brilliant and talented women. Ciara Lacy is a Kanaka Maoli filmmaker whose interests lie in crafting films that use strong characters and investigative journalism to challenge the creative and political status quo. Her work has been shown at festivals around the world, including Sundance, Berlinale, as well as on Netflix, PBS, ABC, Al Jazeera, the Criterion Collection, The Guardian, and The Atlantic Online. Dr. Jamaica Heolimeleikalani Osorio is a Kanaka Maoli wahine artist, activist, and scholar. Heoli is an assistant professor of Indigenous and Native Hawaiian politics at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, three-time national poetry champion, poetry mentor, and published author. Our discussion moderator tonight is ʻIlima Long. ʻIlima has been organizing around Mauna Kea since 2010, and in 2019 landed as the Mauna Media Team Coordinator for Pu'uhonua o Pu'uhuluhulu. She considers herself a friend, student, and comrade of the Osorio Ohana, and she has had the pleasure of moderating artist and community discussions with Ciara and Jamaica over this beautiful film. And I'll hand it over now to ʻIlima, who will share more about tonight's film.
Hey, aloha mai kākou. Totally happy to be moderating tonight. I was telling everybody that I've seen this film, a number of times, and I've always wanted to moderate specifically with Ciara and Heoli together. That's actually a first for me. It's a beautiful film, and I'm going to talk about it and set it up in a second. But following our kind of collective screening of this film, we're going to have some time for question and answers with Ciara and Heoli, Jamaica. I'm going to start by taking my liberties as moderator to ask some questions I've been chewing on for quite a while since this film came out actually it's going on 2 years ago almost, yeah, Ciara? And then we're going to open it up for questions and answers with y'all. And so after the film, I believe the Q&A feature will be opened up, and you can, or at some point, maybe towards the end of our discussion, it's going to open up. And so be thinking about your questions and getting ready to drop them in there. So we also invite everybody during our discussion to just kind of engage in the chat organically as well. So a little bit about this film. This Is the Way We Rise is a film created and directed by Ciara Lacy, who we have here, and it features one of our beloved scholars, activists, artists, Jamaica Heolimeleikalani Osorio, and it goes over, we get to follow Jamaica as she goes through her journey as a poet, and then sort of the transformation that took place as she spent time in struggle, in sacrifice, in awe at Pu'uhonua o Pu'uhuluhulu. And it is both a story about Jamaica and about the Lahui. And I can't wait to talk a little bit more about that. Aside from the things that it means to me, that it means to the Lahui, and that it will mean to all of you, I do want to note that this film has circulated and has gained a lot of really positive, it's been received very meaningfully. So it has been broadcasted on PBS. This film has been featured at over 20 film festivals worldwide, including Sundance. It won the Best Short Film at Thin Line Fest and Walla Walla Film Crush. It was selected as a Vimeo staff pick. It's been featured on Vogue.com. It was selected as IndieWire's top 9 films at Sundance Film Festival and nominated for the NAACP Image Award, #Hawaiian Excellence. I absolutely love it. And congratulations for all of that, Ciara and Jamaica. And so with that said, let's get this show on the road, the reason why we're all here. And Annie or Marie, are one of you guys going to give instructions for the film? Or am I doing that?
Yeah, I can go ahead and give instructions. Thank you so much, ʻIlima, for introducing everyone. I'm Marie from HAPA. I'm the communications organizer. So I dropped a link in the chat for everyone to access. So you'll be going on this YouTube link right here. And so we will be having our talk story from 6:30 to 7. And then after that, we'll have 15 minutes slated for Q&A from 7 to 7:15, and then we'll have our closing. So yeah, so everyone can just report back here at 6:30, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, wait, so real quick, I just want to make sure everybody's clear on the directions. So we're not going to stream it on this screen right here. You're going to click on the YouTube, and it's just going to provide you for a more clearer, richer viewing experience. So if you have any questions or if you're having any troubles, please drop that in the chat. Otherwise, yep, like Marie said, click on the YouTube link that's right there in the chat, and we'll come back at 6. We'll start the discussion at 6:30. So come back in here to pay attention by then. Yeah? Okay, let's do it. There's a lot of people on this call right now there's a lot of kiaʻi on this call, and there's even a good handful of folks who spent time up at the puʻuhonua, a good amount of time working up there, sustaining it. And in the film, Jamaica, you talk about how you didn't have any new way of saying old things, and then when you went up there and you experienced that, it all started coming out. That, I think, is captured really, really clearly in the film. But I'm wondering if you can take a couple of minutes and give us something more specific, either a particular experience or a particular aspect of what you saw happening. And if you can connect that to either how that drove the creative spillage that was happening from you, or even in any particular pieces that you wrote, if you can help us either remember, or those who were not up there, or came maybe just to visit, capture what that was that you were experiencing.
For sure. Thank you. First of all, I want to echo what ʻIlima said. Like, it's pretty amazing to see who's in the virtual room right now, and to have all those memories flood back. It makes this conversation a lot easier in a lot of ways. There was so much happening on the Mauna that was inspiring. And the first thing that I think about is something that in that meeting we went to, a lot of us went to the night before, or the night we traveled up to Pu'uhuluhulu, Kaho'okahi said, and I remember this like it's like it just happened. He said, "I've got the struggle and I've got you." And I remember the way he said it. He said it to this group of us. There were probably like 100, 200 people of us hanging out in that pavilion. And that brought everything into focus. Like, this is about the struggle, but it's also about us and having each other in this struggle. And I think about the Mauna as this space where we were not just, in the words of Andre, like there to ku'e, like we were there to also pupulu, right? And so what happens in those spaces where you're where you're actually building and you're watching and participating as your lahui builds something, both the literal like building of the pu'uhonua and the carrying of the pu'uhonua, but also the building of that national consciousness. I think of writing as an imaginative process, right? Writing is this activity where you have to imagine it before you can create it. And then in the act of writing, you make it so. Well, that's the same thing as nation building, right? Nation building is an imaginative process. And then you go in and you make it so. So how many people have, besides the thousands who joined us up on the Mauna, like had the opportunity to actually be in the center of that kind of transformation, right? And how many folks, there were what, 30 of us that first night? How many of us got to really watch a parking lot turn into a pu'uhonua? And if you can watch something be born in the same way that like Pele gives birth to islands, like we watched people give birth to a movement, to give birth to a place of refuge, and then become a place of refuge for each other. I think you have to be like really, really closed off to not be inspired by that, and to not just have a new way to say old things, but there were so many new things to say. And there were so many new ways that I felt connected to the people around me, to the aina around me. That was the aina of my kupuna that I had been estranged from since my father moved away from that aina. And then I think the other really important thing is when I think about the moments of incredible creativity of our people, and the moments of incredible struggle of our people, right? The overthrow, the 1895 rebellion, like all of these things, and the poetry and the music that was created in those times. Yeah, it was about the struggle, but they were also writing, they were like love songs to each other. I mean, songwriters were writing love songs to Wilcox and the rebellion. Kaulana in many ways is a love song to the lahui who refuse the empty gifts from, you know, imperialism and colonialism. And so I think about something that you brought up, ʻIlima, on Facebook a while ago about like the most common phrase heard on the Mauna was "I love you." And when you're surrounded by all that love, how can you not feel safe and inspired to create? And I know I wasn't the only person who was given that gift. We know that many of us were given that gift of inspiration. And so that's a little bit of the specifics, I guess.
There was a part in the film, actually, wait, let me see. Sorry, I was taking notes. Oh, okay. So I want you I want to pull out something that you just said. What I want you to, can you elaborate a little bit on what was new? Like what had you not experienced before that? I mean, you kind of touched on it, but can you just dig a little bit more, maybe get a little bit more specific? What was something that was new that was just like kind of blowing your mind and you know, generating the creativity and the energy for you?
One really specific thing that I go back to time and time again is the Mauna, and specifically in the pu'uhonua. I think that was the first place in my life as a Hawaiian where there was no use for that idea of being Hawaiian enough. And I say this to mean that like people were coming up to me saying that this is something I've struggled with my entire life. This is, you know, in 2015, I didn't come up because I didn't think it was my place. But then I saw you folks asking for us to come, and I knew this was my kuleana, and I knew that this is how I could be Hawaiian in a way that was pono. So that was something that was new to me, especially as someone who grew up around a lot of people, including myself, who questioned our Hawaiianness and our kuleana to these things. The other really big thing, and I got to call this out because Auntie Kathy's in the chat, but like I saw people sacrificing and laboring and giving to a movement in a way that I'd never seen before, right? Like people, you know, it's really great to like be a poet in a movement and get to write poems and teach nonviolent direct action and like do the fun stuff on the Mauna. There were folks who cleaned toilets multiple times a day, every day, so that we would have a safe and clean place to live. Right? Folks like Auntie Kathy and her crew, folks who worked cooking in the kitchen all day and all night so that we could be fed, folks who took carts of water to last car to make sure that we weren't dehydrated and passing out on the side of the road. That kind of unified commitment to like, I'm just here to serve this place and make this place the best place that it can be, and forget you know, everything else. I'm here to serve this place and my people because the Mauna deserves it. Yeah, that was new to me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then in between all of that kuleana, everybody was going to ceremony and learning the chants and embodying the ceremony and embodying the pilina and the struggle, you know, and so we were all doing all of it together. It was like one big Ava ceremony. Like we were so focused,
so in tuned.
No questions about our identity. Like it was just, you know, good. One more question, and then I want to ask Ciara a couple questions. So there's a part, and I've always wanted to ask you this, and then watching the film today, like I was like, oh my God, like it's actually right there visually in the film too. So you're saying that by 18 or 19, you're writing exclusively about Hawaii. And when you say that, the shot scales a bookshelf. And it's full of all of like the classic canonic Hawaiian scholarship works.
I love my bookshelf.
Yeah. And part of me thinks like, oh my God, like, you know, a lot of our dive into these moments in our history were through the mo'olelo, through the historical accounts, the scholarship and the research. And that drove you, you know, from 18 or 19 on to be able to produce all of this creativity. But then we were the history. We were the, you know, the struggle culminated once again. And then it was, you know, you're now speaking from a very different place. But I actually wanted, there's also this scene where you're talking to students about Haunani K. Trask. As a scholar and as a professor, and as someone who has grown up in a Hawaiian scholarly activist world, do you feel like there are parallels between the message of this film, that there's this creative explosion, which goes beyond you even, right? Now there's all of this music, there's all of this stuff. Do you see any parallels in scholarship, in Hawaiian political thought that have come from the Mauna?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think on a really like surface level, and all the way down to the root, the Pu'uhonua challenged all kinds of ideas about jurisdiction, about what aloha aina really meant, about people thinking about settler colonialism. I think some of us, it even got us to start thinking more seriously about abolition. I think scholarship had to change in the wake of the Mauna, because what we did up there changed the conversation. And it changed what our students believed was possible, especially because many of them participated in the movement, and they made great sacrifices to like be up on the Mauna for months and months and months, along with some of our faculty and staff as well, who were involved in the movement. I think, I don't want to like oversimplify and like put on rose glasses when I talk about the Mauna, but I do think that there was like a rupture that took place, right? When a group of Hawaiians got together and they said, nope, this isn't a parking lot anymore. We're going to do ceremony, and we are going to remark this space. And and this is important, when we say that the Pu'uhonua is a Pu'uhonua, we're not just saying this is a place of refuge. We're saying we are the ali'i of this place, that we have the mana to take over the jurisdictional like rule of this place. And I think that act alone, in relationship with all the other ways that other frontline movements have taken over jurisdictional space, whether you're talking about Standing Rock or Line 3 or even Black Lives Matter, in the way that they take over space and occupy space, there is a new ceiling for the way, especially those of us who are working in political science or even Hawaiian studies or indigenous studies, there's a new world that is possible. And when a new world is possible, we need to think differently about the way we theorize about the world. And I don't know how to make that more specific than that. And just to say that, like, the scholarship you're going to see from that's already been coming out in the last year and a half or so, and for the next 10, 20 years, is going to be certainly connected to the 20, 30 years before, but I think a lot of it is going to be things that folks in my father's generation never would have imagined, because the Pu'uhonua broke something and built something, you know?
Yeah, it was, Ola i ka honua.
Yeah, there was a crack. There was like breaking open.
And it opened, and now it's a new aina, a new aina for us. Sorry, I didn't prepare for lighting, so I'm moving my chair now. Thank you for that. I love that. It's been what my experience too, talking to Kanaka up on the Mauna. Auntie Kathy, you keep coming up so much, Auntie Kathy, but we love you so much. And I remember us having a lot of conversations about Kauikeuli and his birth chant and his ko'ihonua, and like, oh my God, everybody's dancing it 3 times a day. And you know, he's the independence mo'i, and like, what the heck is going on here? I mean, it just brought all of this stuff out. I want to kind of now, so we've kind of covered your poetry and that art, but of course the art of filmmaking is another whole thing that we just got to experience. And Ciara, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions as well. Mahalo for this film. First of all, it's a beautiful contribution to the Mauna movement. It's a beautiful contribution to the storytelling that we find so important to document these moments in our history and in our present. You know, as the Mauna media team coordinator, I mean, I'm not a media person. I'm a media person in as much as you have to do it for, you know, NVDA and activism and stuff like that, but I'm not not a studied media person. But one of the things that we knew as the Mauna media team up there, which was a whole, you know, group, Marie was one of them, photographers, filmmakers, you know, social media people, like there was just a whole crew up there, was like, we are not this objective media thing going on up here, right? Like, we're Kanaka up here. We are responsible to the relationships. We are responsible for everything that we put out is in service, and we're going to conduct ourselves a little differently. So kind of with that framing in mind, I wanted to ask you about a little bit about your process. So, and please feel free to unmute now too. So if you want to just like cut me off or be like, wait, yeah, or whatever, like we can just, it can be dynamic. But this film started out looking at this particular special person we love, Jamaica Osorio, and her journey as a poet. And then what happened took her into this huge moment, and it was a moment that belongs to the collective. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about what that transition was like for you, and how you sort of navigated, or how the story is told that you're because I think that this is like a genre of Indigenous storytelling that we need to kind of talk about and define, where we're looking at Heoli, and we're looking at ourselves, and we're looking at her in this movement, and we're looking at all of us in this movement. And can you just talk about that a little bit as the filmmaker?
Yeah, where to get started in terms of process. I have gone back and forth about, oh, Ciara, what do you actually think about something? Because for me, for process, you know, the focus is not on what I think, it's on what the person that I'm working with, what they think. And really diving into and understanding what their experience and what their perspective is, to the point where sometimes I'm like, where's what they think end, and where am I thinking, and getting a little lost in it. And I think it's a little method on my behalf, but it's also, so I'll walk out of being like, okay, wait, who are you? But I think it also helps me to ensure that, you know, the work is, you know, is always about doing the best work, but also the most oiai'o. Somebody put that in the chat, right? What is the truth? And, you know, as a documentary filmmaker, we often say that there's an emotional truth to work, and just making sure that when you walk away from it, that how you feel, it feels like how you feel feels honest, and how, you know, the subject, the person who's being profiled, that it feels honest and true to them. I started this process thinking, being super stoked, because I'm not great with words. So I thought, what better thing to do to learn about words than to follow somebody who has them? And as somebody who loves slam poetry, it was a little bit of a fangirl moment. And, you know, so much of life, we plan and we plan and we plan, and we think one thing's going to happen. And there's often a fear when we deviate from the plan, And I'd like to suggest that maybe it's not meant for fear. Maybe there's something better for us on the other side when what we aim for isn't exactly what we get. And I thought we would make a film about Heoli's creative process in one way, and we did, but I think it became so much more. I think it was a parallel not only to her personal experience, but to the collective experience of our lahui. And I think being able to focus on her personal journey is a way for people who were experiencing something similar concurrently to relive that, and those who don't have an understanding of our community or our community's needs to be able to follow along and learn. And one thing that I think I'm optimistic about that the work is able to do is, if I start off with, oh, this is the agenda for the Mauna, right? If I start off with, this is the agenda for the Mauna, not to say that there isn't one, or that there isn't there aren't certain perspectives, but if you start that way, there are a lot of people who might turn around and walk the other way. And I think if we're going to focus on Pilina, if we establish a Pilina with Heoli, then, and we trust her and her viewpoint, and we trust her journey and her emotional journey, then the things that matter to her will matter to those watching. And is this a way to help others understand what the Hawaiian struggle is? We're not just up there at the mountain complaining about telescopes. We're talking about history. And if you don't know the history, right? So it's about creating a way to understand where Heoli's coming from and how this is part of a larger historical conversation of colonization and its longstanding impacts on our people. But anyway, I think
you're saying you have a strategic method in
always
storytelling. Love it. Okay, so how do you please, if there's anybody on this call that is like trying to navigate earlier stages in filmmaking, please share with them, how do you own that?
Ooh. You have to have your compass, know where you start from and like where you're going. And I think trust your process too. You don't have to always get it right out the gate. I get it wrong all day long. I got it wrong this morning, I got it wrong this afternoon. I still showed up here today. Mahalo everybody. But if you keep showing up and you keep pounding the work and you know what the bigger goal is, right? Like you always have that vision, for the work, what the work can do. In the same way that we have a vision, hopefully collectively as a product of what Mauna Kea has offered us, a new vision for what we can collectively do as a people. And I think my gratitude to everyone all the kia'i out there, because I didn't have that vision. And I think this process and what I witnessed, gave me a new vision. I was there in 98. I was there all those years. I was smaller, littler, right? I was there with my mother, marching in the street, but there was a sadness to that time, right? And the struggle felt different. And the kako'o of it, the aloha of it, like it was just different. And I knew that. And I had a moment where I was like, oh man, are you ever going to see something like this again? Right? That fear, because something that beautiful, like it's fleeting. And at the same time, I don't know, if it happened once, why not happen again?
Yeah. When I made that post about I did a little quiz that Heoli was referring to earlier. What was the most common phrase up on the Mauna? I mean, I definitely qualified that post in the first couple of weeks because it got way harder and crazier and more like whoa after that. But it was fleeting, is what I'm saying. It was like a I can't believe we're here kind of thing. And you sort of just touched on this, Ciara, but before I just kind of close out this portion with an open question to the both of you, you just touched on what it was like to be not just a filmmaker, but a Kanaka up there. Did you struggle through anything as both while you were in the process of, trying to make the film and being up there and whatever you've been told about filmmaking? And yeah, just how was that?
It's a great question. I don't want to say I'm decolonizing my process. I want to say I'm indigenizing my process. And because I don't want to think about it in opposition, I want to think about it in terms of like what feels honest and true. And I think classic journalism, classic documentary filmmaking is about a separation and a distance and an observation from afar. And if we rest in classic 1950s era journalism, that objectivity, in my opinion, is a lie. And we exist in a world where we can see it dismantling. It's not to say that truth doesn't exist and facts don't exist. I believe in those, and I think that's there. But I think also we need to be honest about the perspective that we're coming with. I think that as long as we rest in that, like, I'm okay having a perspective. I think you need to know that, and I think that's part of why I show up, right? It's the, you know, if it's about our people in prison, right? Like, you're gonna go somewhere with it. I'm gonna have something to say. You might not know right away, because that's the rhetoric of it, right? If I'm doing my job, we get there together. And everyone here on this Zoom today is incredibly smart. So if I showed up telling you what to do, you'd be like, F you, right? And you know what? You'd be entitled to say that. But if it's about giving open space and helping guide you to see where I'm going to, you don't always have to agree with me. You don't always have to agree with Heoli. But you can respect somebody for the thought that comes and like the process that comes with what they present to you. And that respect, I think, is critical. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it definitely gives more insight, and I appreciate it. That's great. Okay, Heoli, if you can unmute now too, and you too, Ciara. So
isn't Ciara the best? Isn't she just amazing? Totally,
yeah, you guys, isn't Ciara the best?
God.
Can we just give everybody, just throw some love in the chat, because I can't wait for Ciara to be the Chancellor of the Hawaiian Kingdom Media Academy.
Oh, yes.
At Hulu University, for real kind.
Every time we do one of these things, I ask myself, why don't me and Ciara hang out more? And then I remember there's a pandemic. But you know.
Yes, it will come. Okay, so I want to know, we've just got a couple more minutes before we open it up to Q&A. So everybody, is Q&A open yet? Yes, Q&A is open. So start dropping some questions in the Q&A, folks. Let's pan out from this one film a little bit. And I would like to know a little bit more about other in the Lahui or in Hawaiʻi, like can we just talk a little bit about the other creative explosions going on post-Mauna, but also in indigenous arts, because there is some badass stuff out there right now. And so just take us on a little ride, give us some stuff to check out, you guys, and what's going on out there.
Oh man, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, as always, music, right? Music is so front and center for us. I have a new crush on a rapper named Punahele out of the West Side. New to me. You guys laughing because you guys know. But
you old lady.
I'm an old lady. And I was like, I want to do a music video for you or something. Like, that'd be super cool. We can get Ku'e and make a music video. And that's kind of a dream of mine. And I don't know, I'm seeing in terms of filmmaking and storytelling, there's all sorts of radical things going on, like Christopher Kuhunana's film Waikiki, you know, beautiful, beautiful poetry there. There's a lot of Native filmmakers, Aina Paikai, like Justin Achong, Aaron Lau, Tai Sanga, the list could go on. And I just feel like we're just at the crest of the wave. And I think in the next 5 years, as radical as we've been in politics, we will take over with visual sovereignty as well. And I'm really excited for that, because when the narrative is controlled by the outside, we're told who we are. And how cool to say this is who we are instead. And I think if I'm ever bummed out about what you doing, right? I'm reminded of the power of what we see. And like you don't always realize it, but what you see and what you see on screen incredibly impacts who you think you are and what the power you think you have. And that was the cool thing about, one last add-on about Mauna Kea. Social media allowed us to provide our own power as our own reporters, as our own storytellers of what was going on. That was our modern version of newspapers. And it's a really beautiful thing to be able to see and witness for those who couldn't make it. So, you know, having control of our own story, our own narrative is the way to go.
You know, a note about one of the films that Ciara mentioned, the Waiheke Christmas film. One of the cool things about that film too, that really speaks to the rupture that was the Mauna. I was lucky that I got to see what we thought was like the final cut of the film before the Mauna happened, and then the Mauna happened, and there was another cut of the film that was made that was actually significantly, importantly different because the Mauna happened, right? So even thinking about that, how the Mauna disrupted artists, not just created more inspiration, but it also disrupted the creative process for a lot of artists. It changed the way that we were going to create it. It changed the way we thought about the stuff we were already in the middle of creating. You know, I don't know if I have anything new that other people haven't heard. I think Kuha'o Mauna Kea was like a brilliant project, you know, that an album that was put together where it was all new compositions for the Mauna and the movement. Kahikina de Silva put together a list basically tracking all the songs, Hawaiian songs that were written after the Mauna. And I don't have the list, it's her list, but I remember when she showed it to me and it was incredible. I mean, there were just like hundreds of songs on that thing. So you can probably expect to see something written by Kahikina about that in the near future, because that is relevant to the research that she does. I also think in addition to all the poets who've come out and the visual art, I mean, the visual art while we were on the Mauna was crazy, right? Like the photographers, the people doing like graphic design. I know Malia's art was transformed by being on the Mauna. But I also think just even the pu'uhonua as a symbol was reborn across the Lahui, right? Like this is a word that maybe a few people knew, maybe some people knew about the history of pu'uhonua, maybe some people knew about pu'uhonua o Wai'anae or some of those contemporary spaces that have propped up and used the pu'uhonua, but the Mauna really popularized the pu'uhonua in a way in our generation that hadn't been done before. And with that, there was also this whole like creative movement space that was born, right? We just saw pu'uhonua popping up all over the place. And then again, like until COVID, like we started to pop up, I think, as pu'uhonua in new ways for each other. And if we think about the movement space as a creative space, which it is, like, I think that should be included too in the way we think about that creative explosion. Yeah.
Okay, awesome, thanks. And if any other folks, maybe even Heoli and Ciara, if you guys can drop a couple names that people should seek out, you know, like Chris and stuff like that. If if any of that comes to mind, just drop it in the chat. Okay, we have some rad questions in Q&A. If there's any more that you guys can think of, we can definitely handle. Yeah, okay, cool. One more just came in. So Janelle asks, so I think this is to Ciara, was the objective or intention to do a documentary before going to the Mauna, or was the inspiration born from observation?
I was originally tasked with making a film about the creative process. It was part of, it is part of a collection of 6 films. It's an anthology of films about artists of color and created by artists of color. So as a Kanaka, I wanted to follow Jamaica and her process as a poet, because what's more Hawaiian than poetry, and what a fun spin to think about it is Sam. So that was the goal from the beginning, and then the Mauna happened, and you do what the Mauna says. So when Heoli told me on a Tuesday, we've said this before, she texted me on a Tuesday, she was all, I think I gotta go to the Mauna because we're supposed to film on Thursday. And you know, you have this moment where you're like, oh shit. And then you're like, okay, I'll see you there, right? Then I call the people, because as a fellow Hawaiian, you don't say, hey, we had a plan. You say, you know what that means, right? And again, like, that's the beauty of real life. sometimes there are things that are more important and more beautiful, and if you're willing to listen, you just follow, right?
Yeah, I like to really tell people, like, this is the film as it exists now is a film that happened by chance, you know, that none of this was planned. And when I texted Ciara and I was like, sorry, I gotta go, I don't know when I'll be back, I probably won't have service, she was like, I'll see you in 3 days. I'll have people up there in 3 days. And this part's really important, right? There are very few people that I would say like okay to on that, right? I've worked with film producers before and TV producers before. I can't think of anyone else I would have said like, okay, yeah, I'll see you there, because there is all this fear around like, I don't want to be filming a film about my creative process while we're like up doing something really important. Like, how is this going to work? And being able to like trust someone like Ciara, who is also Kanaka, who we'd spent some time together getting to know each other. I was like, you know what, it's going to be fine. I can't control this. But yeah, no, we never planned to make a film about the Mauna. The Mauna just showed up and stole the show, which I'm fine with.
Okay. Great answers, thanks. So Sierra asks, it feels like there is often a divide between academia and what's theorized and the lived everyday experience. Did being on the Mauna disrupt this in any way?
Oh, that's such a great question. First, I want to affirm what you're saying in your question. There is a huge divide between oftentimes what's happening in the academy and what's theorized, and then the lived experience. That's a part of the problem with the telescopes in the first place, right? Is actually a divide between the scientific community and the people. But it's not hard scientists that are the only people who have this problem, right? People in political science have this problem. People even in Hawaiian studies have this problem. There is a divide that a lot of us are trying to mend and build pilina and behave in a way that builds the trust with our community. I think the Mauna disrupted this in some ways, in that a lot of us from the university were there. And when you were on the Mauna, you had to humble yourself in a certain way. Nobody cares about your PhD on the Mauna. Nobody cares about the article you wrote last month that people are reading in class. Like, nobody cares about that stuff. People care about whether or not you show up and you do what you say you're going to do. And, you know, if and when the police come, if they can trust you to keep them safe. And so there's a little disruption in that. But that's not to say that it fixed the problem, right? And one of the things that came up really early on the Mauna, and I'm speaking as a scholar now, is these issues about who has the kuleana to tell these stories, to write and theorize about these stories and publish about these stories. There were people who weren't on the Mauna who were writing and publishing about the Mauna when the people who were there on the Mauna didn't even have time to journal about what was happening. And so this brings up another way that sometimes the movement isn't disruptive enough to get us hard-headed scholars to like actually stop behaving like scholars and start acting like people, and start acting like Kanaka, and really thinking about what's your place and when is it your place. And so, yeah, so in some ways, some of those bridges were amended, and in some ways, some of them were made worse. But it's a really good question to ask and to keep asking in this work.
Yeah, great question. Alihi Lani asks, in terms of Lahui rising, what do you anticipate will be next steps for our nation to continue rising after TMT is completely off the table? What a great way to frame that. When the TMT is gone, how do we anticipate next steps for our nation to continue rising? How can we collectively keep this momentum going, y'all? I would love for both of you to share your thoughts on that.
I'll go first since I'm already unmuted. When the TMT is completely off the Mauna and all those other telescopes are gone, good start. Okay, so this is my soapbox. I think everywhere what we want to be going as a people, when we talk about decolonization, we talk about deoccupation, we talk about demilitarization, we talk about living in a future where our people can be free, where our people can be healthy, where our people can be fed, where they can be educated, and we have space to love and enjoy each other and our beautiful ʻAina. I think What's going to get us there? Abolition. I think we need to start thinking and talking more critically about policing in Hawaii. I think we need to be talking more seriously and critically about prisons in Hawaii and punitive justice. And this is a conversation that we're like trying to have right now, and we're having a really hard time at having, especially because we can't be healo a healo, right, face to face, because this is going to require a lot of us to work through a lot of assumptions and our own feelings about these systems. But if you pay really close attention to the mauna in particular, right, a movement that so many of us can get behind, and so many of us believed in the vision and the urgency of that moment, this ongoing moment of protecting that mauna. If you look really closely, abolition and a critique of the police, and not just specifically the police in front of us, but policing and the way that police are used to protect property over people and property over aina, and maintain the status quo. You can follow that trend along to see how those structures and systems are actually harming us in a lot of other ways. So to me, that's the next big push, the next big way we need to start thinking about how we liberate ourselves from the tyranny of America, and behaving like Americans. Yeah.
If I could add on to that, if we're going to talk about Americans, and colonization, America is a country built on the protection of the individual. And if we talk about what Mauna Kea was, it was about the lāhui. And I think now is the moment to begin reminding our community and teaching Western society what the value is of holding us as a community first, and saying that is important. Yes, the individual is important, but the individual is important as part of the collective, and the pendulum needs to swing the other way, because unless we begin to think about ourselves as part of a larger group, we're not going to survive. We're just not. And that's the aloha aina of it. And I think if we talk about vision, right? What's the vision? What's the vision for our goals for incarceration, right? If we're talking about abolishing the prisons, like, why would we do that? Because we have a greater vision, because we hold people to who they are, their potential, what they could be, what they should be, what are the things that they could achieve. And it's about helping them find that realization as an individual, not as somebody, and helping people find the best lives that they can have. Our people as Hawaiians deserve that. We deserve that. And we need to be reminded of that. We deserve to live in our own lands. We deserve to have opportunity. We deserve to thrive. And, I hate to say it because it comes up, and I don't know what the actual piece of it, what this is, because I'm not a political scientist, but I don't know, maybe it's about finding if it's about finding our own sovereignty in whatever ways that it comes together. If it's not about somebody recognizing us federally, because I don't need you, we're still doing the action ourselves to protect each other and our people. And however that happens, I'd like to be there to support how I can.
Love that. And I feel like that reflects exactly what happened up there. None of us would have predicted. It had just happened. This is what sovereignty was. It was answering the call of the moment, and we all knew what we had to do. We had enough of the foundational teachings to be able to move. Okay, I think we're wrapping up. So to close,
can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because it goes on what you were saying. It was sovereignty in action, but it was also for a lot of people who, when you hear the word abolition and you freak out, what does that look like? It was also abolition in action, right? It was creating systems and structures to serve us in the absence of systems and structures that want to harm us, right? So the kitchen tent and Pu'uhuluhulu University and the media and our medics and the nonviolent direct action, all of that stuff, it wasn't just the front against the police that was abolitionist. It was the things that we built. So if you're having a hard time envisioning what an post-abolition society looks like, look at the Mauna, because that's what it was. And it wasn't perfect, which is also what makes it an abolitionist space, but that's what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And I know like you and I have talked about this a little bit, Haley, and share different reflections, but it was also, you know, like after the couple weeks of I Love You was the top thing, it was also actually having to confront conflict and all of the garbage that we have within us, that at times were actually really violent, really harmful, and that people are still traumatized by, because we were trying so hard to refuse state interventions up there. And so there's that whole abolition component up there too, that is like for a whole nother conversation. But yes, so much to learn and take away. And not all of it is rose-colored glasses, like you said earlier. So let's just do one closing kako activity to close us out. Jamaica and Ciara, you guys can each give a little verbal mana'o. Everybody else can drop some stuff in the chat. But you know, if there's something that the Mauna symbolized, it was unity amongst the Lahui, yeah? And then we got taken off the Mauna from COVID. And for me, it feels like it's just been the opposite of unity ever since. There's just been a lot of political discombobulation compared to what we're experiencing. So as a closing activity, and in the spirit of our beloved Mauna and our beloved poet, filmmaker, mana wahine activists, and all of us here, all of you who've contributed to such beauty in the past couple of years, please share some thoughts on a unifying thing that we can come around together beginning today and a little bit on into the future. So folks, drop it in the chat. It can be an issue, it can be a concept, it can be a struggle, it can be whatever. But what can we begin to think about? What is something that we can come together around starting today? And that will be kind of our closing. No, so Ciara and Hilda, you guys can share vocally.
Go ahead, Ciara.
For me right now, giving our people the opportunity, the chance to live in our lands, the choice, helping our people in capitalist America, and like helping them find their way to be able to choose to live here.
For me, and this goes back to a lot of what Ciara was sharing earlier, I think we can all, myself certainly included, do a better job about thinking about our collective kuleana over these strange ideas about our freedoms and our rights. Like if we could just stop using the word my rights, just stop using it entirely and allow that to liberate you into a different orientation to the way we move in the world. Imagine how much these conversations we're having, and we're not having them well in the Lahui right now, how those conversations would change if for a day, for a week, for a month, for a year, you just said, I don't need rights. I need kuleana, and I need the pilina to my Lahui to trust that we're going to make decisions in a way that honor our kuleana to each other. Because I promise you, if we did that, you don't need rights. You don't need freedom if you have kuleana.
If I could add to that, we talk about self-care, right? Because this world is too fast and furious. We have to actually create language to say, you can go take a bubble bath. You can go get your nails done. You can go out to grab a drink with your friend. We have to invent these words to justify the things that are normal. You deserve that. But, you know, expanded beyond self-care, what about kako care, right? I challenge us to not only think about how we care for ourselves, but how we care for our collective. And again, bringing this back to the Mauna, that was a vision and an example of what is possible. And like, what can we do to kako, right? Kako. It's, you know, we take care of ourselves, but we take care of others. And when I first met my husband, he told me, he said, I find my value in what I do to contribute to my family. And I lived in New York for so long, I was like, what you mean? You're like, because I'd forgotten. So what a good reminder.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that so much. Thank you for giving me a tool. Am I just creating language to describe in new ways the things that are already part of my capitalist paradigm in a woker way? Or do I actually really need to rethink some of these concepts? That was great. Great comments in the chat as well. And I encourage everybody, you know, our Jamaica and Ciara, if you didn't get a chance to go through the chat, please do so. I want to thank you both for just, you know, all that you give through your art that comes from your incredible love and passion for the Lahui in Hawaiʻi. Same to our hosts at HAPA over here, and to everybody who came on to this call today to share in some much needed, super refreshing kako space of aloha. This is the opposite of all of my social media experiences today. And I really appreciated everybody, and kukia'i mauna and land back, and see you guys on the Mauna, at Makua, wherever we gotta be. We'll see each other there, okay? Take care.
Mahalo.